A few minutes, because 12 is really a few minutes, on what we do at Pacific Oaks College in our trauma study specialization, some strategies that we've come across that are actually helpful in talking about these topics. So whether it's family violence, immigration trauma, military trauma in the family, any historical trauma like we just heard about genocide, whatever it is, there's some things that really make the conversation more effective. Okay. All right, so being authentic. Who you are, your culture, your family history, where you come from, makes you uniquely you. And this is important. We've all listened to somebody and said, I don't really think they believe what they just said, right? So it comes through. Being who you are is important. Own it, love it, and everybody will appreciate it. But it actually makes the delivery of the information and being able to hear the information much easier. Okay? Compassion. Really can't begin to have a conversation about atrocities or hurt or domestic violence of any kind if you're not compassionate or you don't have compassion. It's something that you're going to want to be able to teach your participants in your workshop, your seminar, your class, but it actually has to start with you. So you got to be compassionate with yourself and the topics, and that way you're able to model to others how to be compassionate. What's your story? So we just heard our last presenter talk about storytelling. Storytelling is actually one of the most important things that you can do when you're trying to facilitate information like this. Everybody has a story. Now, you don't want to get into my story is worse than yours, which does happen sometimes, but providing a way for people to be able to tell their story. So whether it's through journaling, small group discussions, breakouts, any number of ways, whether it's a workshop or a seminar that you're doing, you got to provide a way for people to be able to tell their story, okay? In classes that we've had about family violence, inevitably somebody is touched with some sort of domestic violence or child abuse of some kind. Somebody in the room has been touched. If they didn't experience it personally, somebody in their life, they know somebody who has. So being able to allow them to talk about that, not in a therapeutic way, we can't have therapy in class like that, but be able to share their story in the context of what they're learning really does help people to be able to hear and learn from others. Discussion. So we also heard in our last presenter, discussions, being able to talk about it. To be able to heal from trauma, you have to be able to talk about it. So finding ways to have discussions also increases the likelihood that people are going to be able to receive the information. At Pacific Oaks in our classrooms, we actually sit in a square where we're all looking at each other. That way, we're learning from listening to what everybody else has to say. So we have to be able to hear. We're looking at people in the face, very different from this theater style right now. But it again, enhances the ability to be able to hear somebody else's story and to learn. So discussion is very key. Reflecting. So like John Dewey says, we do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience, okay? So providing opportunities for people to be able to reflect on the information that you're giving them. Each week, I would start the new class asking, was there anything that we needed to discuss from the last class? Sometimes people are able to process in the moment, and that's awesome, but a lot of times people need to be able to take that information, sit on it, think about it, or something happens during the week that kind of like, you know what, that's what we were talking about in class, and then we bring it back up that next week. We give people an opportunity to be able to share their reflections. This can also be done with papers, so you can write reflection papers, or you can also do journaling. We used to do a lot of writing in diaries. We don't do that so much anymore, but you can use electronic journaling or any kind of opportunity for people to be able to reflect and talk about. So not APA style, it doesn't need to be a research paper, but just the ability to be able to say, this is what I learned from this information, or when I read this chapter, this is how it made me feel. Be realistic. So as trite as this may sound, the bottom line is, or the reality is, you're not going to be able to cover everything. There is no one class, topic, workshop, seminar that's going to be able to cover the whole gamut of traumatic experiences. So not only do we have like the natural disasters that people are experiencing right now, we've talked about fires, train crashes, all the types of family violence, intimate partner abuse, and all of the other personal atrocities people have had to experience, like genocide and slavery. You can't cover that. You can't cover all of that, I should say, in one fell swoop. Okay? So be realistic about what it is that your topic is intended to cover, what this activity is planned or designed to do. That way, you can hear feedback from others and say, okay, I need to add another 8-week seminar, or I need to do something else, or we need to develop a class on this because this kept coming up as we were talking about this one thing. But it's really important, just be realistic about what it is that you're trying to do and what you're trying to cover. We have 5 unique specialization classes. So we have an immigration trauma class, we have a historical trauma class, a military trauma in the family, complex trauma and recovery, and even in those 5 classes, there's still so much information, so much literature, so many resources that we don't get a chance to get to because each one of those topics is very broad, very deep, and you're trying to cover a lot. So we have to be realistic. These are the 5 we're going to do, and we're going to give you a list of resources or allow you to do presentations to uncover some of the other material. And lastly, it's self-care. So I'm going to tell you just a quick story about what it was like for me teaching family violence. One of my favorite classes, but it was every semester. Every semester, I'm reading papers, very intimate details. I'm looking for videos to incorporate in my classes, reading new research papers, trying to make sure my material is up to date. But every semester, I'm teaching this class. I'm being compassionate. I'm talking to my students afterwards. I'm creating new material, but not on topics that are pleasant or nice. We're talking about topics where people are hurting other people, right? And I started to get depressed. I started to lose interest. I started to get irritable. And even though I'm the presenter, I'm talking about it, you would think, okay, it's not going to affect me that much, but it really does. So self-care has to start with you, the presenter, the teacher, the faculty member. But that way, you always have to talk about it with your participants and your students. So if it means that you have to provide resources or links or opportunities or connections for them to be able to further discussion, inevitably, these topics are going to bring up things in people that they didn't realize they hadn't experienced or they didn't realize they hadn't dealt with. And to be able to do that, you have to be able to take care of yourself. Another class is historical trauma. So like our last presenter talked about genocide, one of the things that we want to make sure we do and don't do while talking about these topics is get into the arguments and the battles about mine was worse, my people's history is worse, my experience was worse. For those individuals, whether they experienced or generations later their families had experienced it, it's bad, right? For them, it's bad, and it's no worse for anybody else. So that person's child abuse is no worse than that person's child abuse, is no worse than my culture's or my past generation's family slavery or anybody else's genocide, right? So being able to be specific, being able to be compassionate, being realistic about your topics, and providing people the opportunities that we discussed, discussion, reflection, journaling, being able to hear each other respectfully will decrease all of those types of issues and arguments in class. I promise you, I think I've seen it all. I've only been in higher education maybe 7 years total, but in the way that we do our classes, everything comes up. And it's awesome. It's awesome to be in a different type of environment. So it's awesome to not have somebody talk to you. It's awesome to be able to participate in the learning and participate in class and discuss and share. But at the same time, it takes a lot more effort. It takes a lot more staying on your toes. And it takes a lot more empathy and compassion, which again leads us back to the self-care. You really got to go above and beyond taking care of yourself. These things are not going to change. Every day we turn on the news and there's something else that makes us like, what now, right? So taking care of yourself, discussion, all of these things are possible. They can be done with the 2-hour workshop or seminar. They could be done with the 16-week semester. You just have to put the time in, energy, and it does make for teaching these topics a little bit more time-consuming. So you're not just preparing your lecture and you're going to get up at the podium and present and have your PowerPoints, but you actually have to be involved in the material, right? Because you're going to have to create discussion questions and create opportunities for students to be able to, and participants to be able to be involved. There's numerous ways, though. I had a student who designed doll making as a way to healing from trauma. So she has a class on doll, and so as benign as we think doll making is, right, she's been able to incorporate her studies into healing, right? So there's dance, there's music, there's cooking, and then again, there's all of the other things we talked about, the seminars, the workshops, and the classes. So thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it.